Yes, welcome everyone to the session. Thank you for taking the time out. So this is the next in the series of Innovation Broking's series of events to support our clients and various sectors we work in. So today we're very lucky to be supported by one of our insurance friends in Ecclesiastical. We're also very lucky to have Jacky Cattini from DWF. I'll let Jacky give her own introduction, but she's very much the highlight of the session. We appreciate, although Angus and I might find insurance interesting, others not so much. So we really want this to be a practical session and really to share some stories and examples of recent incidents, hopefully not to scare you too much. So just by way of introduction, we have muted everyone, so we will give you an opportunity to speak during the Q&A at the end of the session. You should have a chat function, which is at the bottom, so if you have got any burning questions, I will be keeping an eye on the chat function throughout, and we'll stop at sporadic points just to look at those. So if you've got any burning questions you don't want to forget, please do make a note in the chat function, and we'll allow some time at the end of the session. We have allowed an hour and a half, just in case there's time for questions. If we finish slightly earlier, we will do so and give you that valid time back. So yes, hopefully, if anyone's got any IT issues, please do drop me a note on the chat, as I won't be available on my email. So I think that's covered off most of the housekeeping. Just for your reference, the session is being recorded. None of your faces or names are to be seen, but we will share this on our social media platforms for other clients that couldn't make today's date. So just for your reference. And if anyone wants a copy of the session, we can email that at a future date. So we've got some clients on here that aren't clients of innovation or Ecclesiastical, so just by way of a short introduction, I'm Jonathan Taylor, Director of London for Innovation Broking and Head of Charity and Care. So Innovation Broking, for those of you who don't know, is a top 100 broker based out of London and Watford. We very much specialise in three sectors. So we've got our commercial department looking at sort of SME, top-end commercial. We look at a lot of tech organisations, and then I head up the charity and care. So you can see an example on this particular slide of some of the types of organisations we look after. So some of the sort of largest brands in the country in terms of charities, Comet Relief, Prince's Trust, etc., and then looking in care and special schools as well. Just for reassurance that anyone that isn't in those sectors, this webinar, although some of the examples will be charity specific, the topics covered can cover any single sector and any single organisation. So although it's brought to you by myself and our team, it's very much applicable for all sectors, just to put your mind at rest there. So that picture is a little bit old, so I probably need to update that. I'm still clinging on to the hair, unfortunately. And the other good-looking gentleman there is our MD, Howard Pearson, that's also on the webinar as well. You might notice there on the bottom right, that's our website. So again, we can send the link following that, because there's lots of great content on there which is accessible for clients and non-clients as they like. So we've got a series of webinars, videos. We're actually doing a series of short videos, sort of insurance in under 5 minutes for particular topics. And one of those is actually cyber. So Howard has produced a video in under 5 minutes on what is cyber insurance and what types of risks that would cover. So it might dovetail quite nicely as a follow-up to this session, which is available on the website, or we can send you that short video, which you can watch on your laptop or handheld device. This slide just shows some of the examples. If you keep an eye on our website or follow us on LinkedIn, you'll see lots of various content that should be applicable and hopefully help you in these really. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pass straight over to Jacky. Hopefully we've got the technology sorted there in terms of the speaker. Always the way we had everything planned and set up, and then there was a bit of a hiccup just before, so apologies. I think we're good to go. I'm going to pass over to Jacky, let Jacky be the main keynote speaker for the session. So just for background on Jacky, Jacky is ex-Met Police and now head of crime, financial crime at DWF, or the sort of what Jacky doesn't know probably isn't worth knowing, and she's really going to educate you guys hopefully on some key risks in the sector at the moment. So over to you, Jacky.
Okay, thank you. As you are aware, my name is Jacky Cattini, and I think that today I'll be taking you through both internal fraud and external fraud. Next slide, please. And here, I think on the right, you can see that it says that charities believe they're most vulnerable to internal fraud 21% and external fraud 20%. So you can see that it's high on the list. Next slide, please. The table on the side is an extract from the Charity Commission Fraud Report and outlines the most common frauds. So you can see that mandate, CEO fraud being your most common external threats, and abuse of position being the internal threat. Next slide, please. So firstly, I'll start with the external threat. Next. In my experience, charities are targeted generally because they are smaller than most businesses, will have limited resource to implement additional checks for fraud, and are generally trusting of others. There may also be insufficient training, recurrent fraud trends and MOs, and staff generally have a full workload. The size of the charity is not always small, as there have been some larger charities targeted, but this does require more planning and effort by the fraudster, rather than an email followed by a phone call, and they can be calling from anywhere in the world. So on the slides, you'll see that I've put up the two main threats at the moment. So the first one is business email compromise, often referred to as CEO fraud, due to the impersonation of a high-level executive. This has been around for a little while, but fraudsters are definitely getting more sophisticated in their approach and becoming even more convincing. There are two methods they generally use. One is an email of a top exec could be hacked, or he may have been phished, or even smished, which smished, if you don't know, is by text message, to obtain his password to his email account. Or they will, the fraudsters will email from a very slightly different spelt domain name, usually off by one or two characters, and they will request an urgent payment to a supplier or to complete a contract, and then they'll provide bank details and say, if it doesn't go through today, the whole contract's lost, and they make this massive urgency. The fraudsters also, for CEO fraud, we generally put a bit more effort into these, as there's a lot of money at stake. They would phish other members of the organisation, and that's called spear phishing, which is targeted phishing of specific people, so that they understand who has the authority for payment, and potentially to even choose a time when that exec that they're going to impersonate may be at a conference, tied up elsewhere, so nobody can contact them, so they can't check whether it is actually them or not. Some of these frauds have actually been in the millions of pounds. So moving on to payment diversion fraud, sometimes called mandate fraud, but commonly called Friday afternoon fraud. Again, due to the urgency, it must get done before the weekend. This is probably the more common one that you'll see, where a supplier's email has been hacked or spoofed, and they'll provide an invoice with updated bank account details. Sometimes they provide an excuse as to the change of bank account, or they're having problems with HSBC, they've frozen their account, etc., and they've had to move account. Other times they just hope that you don't notice and pay this as a one-off payment. I think a lot of the time it would depend on whether they're an established supplier or not. If they are established, they will also chase you to...
Oh, sorry, Jackie, I think we just had a hit
from the actual suppliers themselves. One thing to note, though, is that payment diversion fraud and APP fraud, which we haven't discussed, which is automated push payment fraud, is actually being tackled by the banking industry due to confirmation of payee that came into effect in 2020. However, one real important thing to note is that banks' payments are generally not covered, and also not all banks are signed up to this. Therefore, only the banks participating will be able to check names on the accounts actually match. This would often suggest that other banks that are not participating will be targeted for new accounts, And any payment diversion fraud will probably go through these because they cannot check that name. So keep an eye out for the non-traditional banks being used, which could be a red flag if a change of bank details is requested. Next slide, please. Right, this is just for fun. Let's see how quick you can spot the difference. The ones on the left are the correct ones. The ones on the right are the spoofed ones. Okay, so the first one, you can see that the extension, the correct extension is .gov.uk, but they've put .co.uk. For the second one, you'll see that it's Red House Developments, and they've just dropped the S, Red House Development. And then on the last one, you can see that Jenny has now got an extra I in her name. These, again, you know, would have been very difficult to spot. I think with people working from home at the moment, the stress of kids, homeschooling, juggling this work-life balance, it's easy to rush or be distracted and miss these little nuances. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to show you how easy it is to actually spoof a well-known domain name. So on the left are the correct ones. On the right are the ones that you can purchase. I looked these up on GoDaddy, and I can buy these from as little as 84p. And I think you'll be able to see, you know, some of these you probably get fooled pretty easily. I think especially ones where, say for instance, the NSPCC, where you've got ones in capitals, if you just saw that, you wouldn't necessarily look at that extension. Next slide, please. I'm often asked how fraudsters spoof telephone numbers. And so I'm now going to reveal all. It is actually via an app. Now, both of these companies, SpoofTel and SpoofCard, they offer a service which can actually hide your telephone number. There are more companies out there, but these are the ones that I've chosen because they're the most prominent ones in the market at the moment. So on the screen on the left, hopefully you can see that under the SpoofTel, you can see that you can enter the details, who you want to call and what you want to display at the other end. On top of that service, they also offer additional services where you can even change the pitch of your voice. Higher for more feminine, lower for more masculine. You can even add background noises in, like at a train station. You can also even spoof a text message. So, has anyone here received a text message allegedly from their bank? I know I have. Thankfully, I knew it was spoofed. Payment for this service can also be made via cryptocurrency. And this ensures that the fraudsters are not traceable. Next slide, please. So here are two examples of, one is a payment diversion fraud and one is a CEO fraud. So the one on the left, I'll just take you very quickly through it. Red Kite Housing, they said that this is the payment diversion fraud. They said that the criminals mimicked the domain and email details of known contacts that were providing services to Red Kite. They recreated an email thread that misled those who were copied into the email that it was actually a genuine follow-up to an existing conversation for the change in the bank account details. And therefore, the verification process was probably not followed correctly due to that thread. And they lost just under £1 million because of this. You can see that there was a process in place to actually verify that, but it wasn't done. The example on the right is a CEO fraud. Fraudsters impersonated the CEO of the county council, Jacky. They contacted a junior staff member pretending to be her, and requested the transfer of €4.3 million to an account in Hong Kong. Now, firstly, for me, that probably should have been a red flag for that amount of money to be going out. The transfer was actually done. However, it was detected before the funds cleared, as it generally takes between 3 to 5 working days for an overseas payment to clear. And so the money was frozen and subsequently recovered. Next slide, please. The emerging threat. Here's a new one. AI voice impersonation. I think the media sometimes refer to it as deep fake. This is where genuine recordings of people are processed and manipulated via artificial intelligence. The software is readily available, and for ones like Baidu, which was created in China, it can mimic a voice in under 1 minute. So in essence, just using less than 1 minute of somebody's voice. Some need a little bit longer, like a few minutes. And there's a software called Lyrebird out there that takes a few minutes to mimic. Now think about the top execs that you've got that could be given presentations at conferences or interviews for radio or TV, with a lot of them either readily available on YouTube or even on your own websites. Next slide, please. So here are a few prevention tips to ensure you don't fall foul to CEO or payment diversion fraud. Understand your risks. If you don't understand what the current threats are, how can you put controls in place? Make sure your staff are aware of them. If they're not aware, how can you expect them to be looking out for them, looking out for the red flags? Ensure you've got a manageable process for all transactions. This is, in essence, your 4 eyes check, especially on the larger value payments. Any static data change, which includes a bank account, there should be a procedure to check via a different channel. So if something comes in via email, you contact that person by phone or even by post. But it's not just about a bank account as well. You may find that what's been happening in a lot of the banking industry is that people come on, change the mobile number first, then wait a couple of weeks, and then they'll come in and change the bank account. And then when you go to do that check via a different channel, you're actually ringing a fraudster. So make sure that there is not any changes in quick succession as well. Also, ensure policy adherence. So as I said on the previous example, you know, they didn't adhere to the policy and they lost just under £1 million. So you may want to consider spot checks, you know, possible assurance testing, and make sure it's included in your audits. Next slide, please. So I'll now move on to internal fraud, which I think currently, due to COVID restrictions of people working from home, has actually increased. So I'm not going to read out all the slide, but I think I'll just point out the key points. Employee fraud accounted for the highest level of fraud losses, and also the highest percentage of insider fraud was due to trust. Employees are costs, and charities obviously wish to ensure they have as low cost as possible so those in need benefit. However, there is really a balance that has to be made, as the consequences, apart from reputational damage, can also be loss of funding. Next slide, please. Common methods of internal fraud are employees altering recipient bank account details to divert payments to accounts they control, fabricating false invoices for payment where the money is sent to an account they control. And this doesn't have to be in their name. It could be, you know, a friend's name, you know, a relative's name, you know. So again, you know, it's you've got to make sure that even though it isn't in their name, you don't discount that they've been participating in it. There's payroll fraud, you know, whether this is, you know, fabricated overtime or a complete phantom person, or just keeping someone on the payroll who's left but pocketing their money. And expense fraud, and obviously I won't go into detail about it. I think everyone knows what expense fraud is. Next slide, please. some of the common red flags to look out for. Generally, it's extremes. Living beyond your means. You know, you may find that they're coming in designer wear. You know, they've got all of a sudden got a brand new car. They're going on expensive holidays. Or it could be that all of a sudden, you know, they keep complaining about that they haven't got any money. They're going through a really expensive divorce. They've got family problems. Or they could also have a close association with a vendor or a customer, and that might be where they're putting through false invoices and splitting the difference. They could be controlling and protective of their responsibilities, unwilling to share duties because they may be scared they're going to get found out. They also could be very defensive or suspicious. And in a lot of examples that I've seen and worked on, there have been addiction problems. And this does drive a lot of the internal fraud. Do they take a lot of time off? Do they only take a day here and a day there, and they never take a chunk of holiday? They never take a 2-week leave. They don't want to leave their systems open for anyone else to have a look at. Are they still accessing systems remotely while on leave? Yeah, are they going in at odd times? I mean, do you look at any of this? Are there any flags that your IT department have got in place that can flag this to you? And again, the social isolation. I think this is mainly because they're scared to talk in case they let something slip. Next slide, please. So what I'll do, I'll just take you through a few examples that have been in the media. I mean, in the majority of these cases, you'll find that they were committed over, you know, a fair period of time. I mean, sometimes years. As generally an employee will start small, then they'll gain confidence, and then the payment amounts get larger and larger. It's this group that generally gets them found out. So on example one, this hits a couple of the common methods that I've already mentioned. Amending the recipient bank account details and also fabricating invoices. However, in order to evade detection, she used colleagues' email login details. And it wasn't just a single colleague either. It was multiple colleagues. In example two, this is payroll fraud. Booth was paying current and former staff members. Now, she'd been doing this for 7 years. And she'd been working at the company for 33 years. Trusted. Not someone you'd look at and label fraudster. I hear this a lot. Oh, it can't be her. She's so lovely. Oh, she's so sweet. She's so kind. She's so gentle. Believe me, they come in all different shapes and sizes. And the third example on this slide, again, this fraud was perpetrated over a number of years. This was approximately 8 years. And again, it worked at the charity for a considerable period, 21 years. Trusted, long-standing employee. Now, this was an expenses fraud. And people think of expenses fraud as being low value, but it can really accumulate. And you can see that he was ordered to pay back £141,000 to the charity. Now, please note that following his arrest, the hospice advised that donations fell by about £100,000. And staff and volunteers were verbally abused by members of the public. So you can see there are huge knock-on effects from these. Next slide, please. Example one on this slide relates to a CEO who lived an extravagant lifestyle. He was already on a good salary. He was getting paid just under £6,000 per month, but obviously that wasn't enough for him. He'd been with the charity for 21 years. He provided false invoices for cheques to be raised that were payable again to accounts he controlled, but he also awarded himself bonuses and pension top-ups. And the knock-on effect of this was that there were 6 redundancies, 4 staff were put on reduced hours, but asked to take on more workload, and there was a slump in donations. And the final example that I've got, again, login details of other members of staff used to cover their tracks. What I want to point out is that having interviewed people who are accused of wrongdoing because it is their login details and they've not committed any crime due to deception of others, it is extremely distressing for them because they are absolutely innocent. So Kim Bruce was ordered to repay £1, having stolen 47,000, as she allegedly had no assets. And she did not steal just from one charity, but 2 charities. She was employed at one, stole from them, left to go to another, and then carried on a little crime spree. Next slide, please. So I've outlined some fraud prevention advice in order to stop you becoming the next example of my slides. So I'll just take you through a few of them. Whistleblow facilities. I mean, it's always make sure that there is that facility there for people to let you know of uncertainties or something out of the ordinary, and the fact that they can do it anonymously. Monitoring and alerting of audit logs, transaction logs, access. Again, access out of hours. Are people going on, changing bank account details and then switching them back again? It's these types of things that you probably need to say, right, can my IT department set me up an alert so that I can get alerted to this type of stuff? And again, investigate budget anomalies. There will always be a budget for, say, for instance, IT. Why has it gone over? Is it because there's been false invoices been put in under that particular cost centre? Review of privileges or access controls for what I call toxic combinations. Now, a toxic combination will be where somebody can, say, for instance, do a payment and authorise it all in one go. Ultimately, they don't need anybody's approval. They can input it, they can approve the supplier, they can put it through, and absolutely nobody will notice. You need regular policy and procedure reviews. Ultimately, I think you'll find that there may be changes in the bank procedures, and again, you need to make sure that these are all in your policy and procedures. Review your fraud risk assessments, especially where IT or procedure changes are implemented, as well as doing them on a regular basis. We suggest annually. You probably need an alert for new suppliers to ensure that due diligence is actually being conducted correctly as well. You might find that you might get a brand new supplier that comes in, they've only just been set up on company's house. Why all of a sudden are we using them? Who's authorised it? Make sure that the approval's in place. Employee vetting procedures. Do make sure that you actually get from HR some form of okay from them. Ultimately, it's quite easy for people to provide, this was my boss at XYZ company, but they don't know that person's been stealing. They don't know, they know them as a friend and they don't necessarily know them as a worker. HR will probably know a lot more about if there've been any concerns. So make sure you get it from HR. And then monitor changes in employee behaviour. Again, the red flags list that I mentioned earlier, are people constantly coming out going, I need more overtime, I need a pay rise? Is there an urgency behind it? What is the problem? Does it look like they've got addiction problems? So I trust that I've given you some tips to take back with you. Hopefully these are already implemented in your business. And I think we're going to be taking questions at the end. Okay, thank you.